we draw on a little topic, on a sikha from Rebbe that is based on the Pasha of the week, and then we discuss it and try to learn something from it. This week we're also basing our discussion on the sikha from Rebbe, as always, but this time, because of the period, the general period, and the coming Shabbos is called Shabbos Chazon, so we will base our talk on a sikha from Rebbe on Pashas Chazon, even though it's not Pashas Dvorim as usually, but it's all interrelated. You know that the Shabbos, the coming Shabbos is called Shabbos Chazon. That's how it's called. The word Chazon means vision. And in the simplest sense, it's called Shabbos Chazon because this Shabbos we're going to say the Haftorah that begins with the word Chazon, Chazon Yishaya. The vision of Yishaya. Yishaya was a Novi, and the first chapter of Yishaya begins with the word Chazon Yishaya, where Yishaya is reprimanding the Jewish people for having strayed from the ways of Hashem, and he is describing the error, the grave error that they are making. In general, I'm sure you already learned, you already know, you heard that everything in the Torah, everything that every behavior, every relationship that Hashem shows to the Jewish people, even if it is extremely negative, like the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the driving out of the Jewish people of Eretz Yisrael, emptying out Eretz Yisrael. You understand that Yisrael was emptied from Eden. All of that. So, on the surface, and a very deep surface, it was very negative. But deep down, it had a positive underpinning, a positive reason behind it, for ultimately to bring the Jewish people back in a much more solid and deeper way than even before. And the same is absolutely true with the biggest tragedy, so to speak, in the Jewish history, is the fact that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The Beis Hamikdash represented God's presence in the world and represented God's presence with the Jewish people. Since the time of Matan Torah, since the time that the Torah was given, started the Mishkan first. In the desert there was a Mishkan. Hashem said, make a Mishkan so that I will be with you. Then when they entered Eretz Yisrael, the Mishkan was erected in several places. For about 350 years, the Eden had the Mishkan, and in the Mishkan there was the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah, and that was revealed. After that, there was the Beis Hamikdash. The first Beis Hamikdash Shlomo HaMelech built and lasted about 410 years. Then that was destroyed, and 70 years later, the second Beis Hamikdash was built, and it lasted also over 400 years. And then finally that was destroyed by the Romans, and since then we are floating around in the Golus all across the world. without an anchor, without the Beis Hamikdash. All that is not just as a punishment, God forbid. All that is for the purpose, clearly, for ultimately rebuilding the third Beis Hamikdash, which will supersede, everyone knows what that means, which will be greater than the other two Beis Hamikdash. And the third Beis Hamikdash will have this most profound quality that it will be permanent, it will be eternal. The third Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed. The third Beis Hamikdash will not be destroyed, cannot be destroyed, will be indestructible. And we want to talk about this element, this concept. How can anything in the world be indestructible? There is a saying from the Rabbi Abba Paltiel. Rabbi Abba Paltiel, this was a saying that was repeated. The Rebbe repeats it in the Sikha by Rabbi Abba Paltiel. Rabbi Abba Paltiel said in the name of Rabbi Abba Paltiel that the inyan of Chazoin, Shabbos Pashas Chazoin, Shabbos Chazoin, the Shabbos of vision, what is that? This is the Shabbos that every Yid is shown the third Beis Hamikdash. Even though we don't see it with our flesh eyes, but the Neshama sees it. And we will discuss the significance of that in a moment. Every Yid is shown the third Beis Hamikdash. And the purpose of this vision is to arouse a desire by the Yidden to cleanse oneself, to strengthen oneself, to purify ourselves, so that we will ultimately merit to get this Beis Hamikdash. Because this Beis Hamikdash represents something that the Jewish soul desires very intensely, very strongly. And therefore, when it is shown, it has that, it arouses the Yidden to elevate themselves out of the Golus and anticipate and work towards receiving the Beis Hamikdash. And the Paltiel gives a little illustration for this type of experience. What's called the moshel. And the moshel is that a king had a prince, and he made the prince a new garment, a princely garment. And the prince did not know to value this garment sufficiently, did not to appreciate the value of this garment. And thus he went and he allowed this garment to become torn, to be damaged. So the king went and made another garment for the prince, a better one. And hoping that now that the prince has learned his lesson and he saw the value of this garment, this time he will watch it and it shouldn't get torn. And the prince got this garment and he watched it for a little longer than the first one, but eventually that one also got torn. So then the king saw that the prince is not prepared, is not ready for this type of valuable clothing. But he wanted the prince to have it, because this is what a prince is supposed to wear, princely garments. So he went ahead and he made for him a third garment, even more valuable than the other two. And this garment represented, so to speak, the epitome, the perfection of a princely garment. But he realized there's no point of giving it to him because he will not know how to guard it. So he made it, and he kept it in his treasure house. And from time to time, he would take the garment out and show it to the prince. And he would tell him, when you have trained yourself and directed yourself on the right path, so that it will be clear and obvious and assured that this garment will not be torn, you will get this garment. And that way, from time to time, in certain appropriate moments, the king would take this garment out of the treasure house, and he would show it to the prince. And each time that he would show it to the prince was very affected by this vision, by this sight. And he saw, this is the real thing. Everything else that I have is not worth anything in comparison to this. And then the king would hide it. And in the meantime, the prince would work very hard and want to merit to get this garment for his own use. And the Badishiva says that this way, the king entices. Everybody knows what entices means? He arouses, he excites the prince to work on himself and bring himself to such a state where not only is he able to control himself, but he'll be guaranteed, assured that he is never going to fall down again. Because he has seen this garment, it will entice him to work on it. And most of the nimsa for that is the Beis Hamikdash. But the same thing is the first Beis Hamikdash, the third, second Beis Hamikdash. And then finally the third Beis Hamikdash is being kept away in the treasure, in the godly treasure. And from time to time, we are permitted to give a glance at it. And this glance has such a profound effect that ultimately it can change on the most profound and a fundamental way the Jewish people, to the point where they will be entrusted with the third Beis Hamikdash. They will be able to really appreciate it and guard it properly. This is the motion of the Badishiva. Now, although it is true that when someone sees something very valuable, that's very enticing, it's very exciting, and you really want it. But anything that you see, you can turn away and not see. In other words, you only saw it. It's still at a distance. It's not something that became part of you. We know that even that when we received the Torah on the Har Sinai, at the time when we received the Torah, it says that all of us saw the godly fire. All of us heard the godly sound and the words coming from Hashem. So we all saw it very clearly. It wasn't a question of whether it's true, whether Hashem is speaking to Moshe. We saw it with our own eyes. And we heard it with our own ears. So it wasn't a question of doubt. There's not a possibility of that. And yet, what happened after Matan Torah? Less than 2 months later, they had the Egel. It's very shocking. But that's what happened. The truth is that if you reflect back, the entire experience that Eden had by Yetzias Mitzrayim, coming out of Egypt, but there were miracles one after the other. But it also couldn't be doubted whatever. And yet, there was all the time complaints and arguments. And many times during the journey that Eden traveled in the desert, I'm sure you learned by now much of it, many times Eden said, okay, goodbye Moshe Rabbeinu, we are breaking away, we're going back to Egypt. Right? You learn about this. Let us appoint a leader, and we're going back to Mitzrayim. This happened several times in the desert. After all the miracles and after all the Matan Torah, all the visions. How is that possible? Was there any doubt as to what they saw? So obviously, there is some kind of a gap. Remember a gap? Some type of an empty space between what the person learns, what a person understands, even what the person sees, and his own reality. He can see and understand and even argue the point that this is true, this is right. And his own reality remains someplace else. Just as in the simple experience of sight, the person can see and everything is real, then he closes his eyes and everything vanishes. Because this sight does not become part of him, it's outside of him. So he also always has to kind of remind himself, remember what you saw there, remember what you understood. He says, yes, I saw it, but this is me. It's not part of me. And his own self, so to speak, remains outside of that. And this is how it was possible. Now we're saying that the vision of the third Beis HaMikdash will be such a vision that would not allow for that, would not allow for falling off. That this vision will have such a profound effect that will guarantee that Eden will never lose it. It will permeate their whole being and they will never break away from it. Now the question is, what's so special about this vision versus everything else that we saw in our history? In simple terms, to explain this difference, in everything there is the physical and the spiritual. In the first and second Beis HaMikdash, let's say, the first and second Beis HaMikdash, they were built by human beings. And then within the Beis HaMikdash there were constant miracles. There was a godly presence, there was a Shekhinah present in Beis HaMikdash. There were constant miracles. The Mishnah enumerates 10 miracles that were constant in the Beis HaMikdash. Anytime that a Yid came to Beis HaMikdash, you right away saw something totally supernatural. Such as, let's say, the fire on the Mizbeach on the altar there was a fire and there was smoke rising up. Usually when smoke rises up, it doesn't rise up straight as a pillar. It wavers along with the wind. The smoke rising up from the altar in the Beis Hamikdash didn't waver. It went straight up. And this was something which was always obvious. We saw this is not a natural thing, not a natural phenomenon. We saw all kinds of miracles. The gap, that which separated, so to speak, the spiritual from the physical was that this is a spiritual and this is physical. They're two separate entities. Yes, in the Beis Hamikdash there is spiritual, but there is also the physical. The physical does not become part of the spiritual. There's a physical and there's a spiritual. They're two separate entities. Just as, even on a more personal level, we all live and our bodies are alive, and we all understand the old sense that it's not that our body lives, there is some kind of a godly spirit, a godly neshama that keeps us alive. Life is a neshama thing, and we don't even understand what it is. And we see clearly that the body cannot sustain its own life, it does not live on its own. The body lives as long as the neshama is in the body. And when, as we show, when the neshama separates from the body, then the body ceases to live. Doesn't live on its own at all. Even while the neshama is in the body has to be maintained. You have to feed it, you have to watch it, you have to keep it and in good health, so that it can retain, it can be a good receptacle for the neshama. And if it is neglected, then the body will not be a proper receptacle for the neshama, and your health will be affected. Okay.
It's possible, like when it's Hashem sent our Shama in body for experience, so we got experience here in his life, so and all different experience. I mean, and when it's coming back, it's our experience. So the experience is this, so be, how say, like, be pure, like, believe in God, it is. And if you, like, have a, like, all, I mean, negativity, so you need, like, repeat it. So.
We're not talking the purpose of the neshama coming in the body. This is a separate topic.
Yeah.
My point is that the neshama, even though the neshama is in the body, and the body lives from the neshama, nevertheless, they're still two separate entities. And the neshama could separate from the body. It doesn't become one thing. The body doesn't live forever. When the neshama leaves the body, it no longer lives. They're two separate entities. And the same thing is when there was the Shekhinah in the Beis Hamikdash. And they were able to see the Shekhinah Beis Hamikdash, but there was two separate things. There was the physical Beis Hamikdash, and there was the Shekhinah in the Beis Hamikdash. So that when we are turning towards our spirituality, we see the Shekhinah. Then we turn to our physicality, we see our body, we feel the physical world. And this was a constant disparity, a constant conflict. And this is how it's possible that one could see the biggest miracles and then turn around and forget about them completely. Oh, whoa, wait a second. Here's the reality, the physical reality. And this is why this type of, even vision, even something most convincing such as vision, also does not guarantee that a person will necessarily follow that path. Because a person, generally speaking, reacts to the moment as he sees it at this moment. And therefore yes, I saw it, this was yesterday, but today I see something different. There's a special quality, therefore, in the vision of the third Beis HaMikdash. That in the third Beis HaMikdash, it says that third Beis HaMikdash is going to be different. Essentially, as mentioned before, the first and second Beis HaMikdash were built by human beings, erected by human beings. The third Beis HaMikdash will be built by Hashem Himself. There are different ways that this is explained, but in every different way that we explain this principle, that the third Beis HaMikdash will come from above, the important point is that the building itself will be fully imbued with a godly effect. That it's a godly building. It's an edifice that was built by Hashem, not an edifice built by human beings. Even though this is a physical edifice, but this edifice itself is actually built by Hashem. Let me explain what that means for a moment. And I want to take an analogy from the human body. The human body, we have a head, we have bodies, and in the body we have the heart, the lungs, the heart, the liver, and we have all the necessary internal organs that keep everything functioning. Then we have our hands and we have our feet. And in the head we have the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the brain, the ears, all the organs of the finest faculties that we possess. And in this body there is a neshama. And the neshama brings life to this body. Now, we are able to speak, for instance, because we have a mouth. But then, lahavdil, animals also have a mouth. They're not able to speak. That's a small illustration that the reason we're able to speak is not because we have a mouth. The reason we're able to speak is because we have a neshama that has that quality, that has this idea of speech, this level of speech. How that is in the neshama is not for here to discuss, but clearly this comes from the neshama. It's uniquely human. Every animal, every land animal, every animal in the world has a brain, but they don't have intelligence like a human being. So we understand that all our limbs, our hands, our feet, we're able to do all kinds of different things with our hands, not because we have hands, but because we have a neshama that has that koyach. And the hand is the means by which this koyach, this ability functions. You all understand that? So that when the neshama descends into the guf, unites into the guf, all the various faculties of the neshama come through and reveal themselves in the various parts of the guf, of the body. and thereby the neshama unites, correlates, and keeps together all the various parts of the body, the hands and the feet and everything else. And this is how the human being functions. So that even though the right hand is one thing, the left hand is another thing. They're two separate hands. But because that the neshama is in the body, you don't feel that you have two separate hands. It's all one entity. The neshama unites every part of the group. Not only that the neshama unites every part of the group, but in truth, the body is built according to the needs of the neshama. The body, the human body, is built in such a way that it should be able to receive this particular neshama. And if it were a different kind of body, then the neshama couldn't function. Like if you put the neshama, the human neshama, into an animal, it won't be able to function. And the goof has to fit the neshama. So that the goof, even though it's a physical entity and it has all kinds of parts, what does it really represent? Doesn't represent a structure, it represents what a neshama is, what the human neshama is. That's what the goof represents. Like we explained some other time, that one of the differences, the most obvious differences between the human body and the animal body, is that the human being, his head is on top, and everything else comes down from the head, and the feet on the bottom. What does this represent in terms of the human being and the neshama? That in the human being, the most important element, what is the focus of the human being? What is the most the central thing? What defines a human being? It is his intelligence. That's why the head is on top, and this is what leads him, and everything else is subservient to that. By an animal, the head is on an even level together with the rest of the body, because he's not guided by intelligence. On the contrary, he's guided by his belly. He needs this for the food. That's all he's doing, looking for food all the time. There was an artist one time examining a very exquisite piece of art. He wasn't an artist, actually. He was a farmer. An exquisite piece of art presented by a world-renowned artist. And it was a field, a natural scene. And he was presented, he was painted in very vividly, like you were there. It's a living field, everything's alive. And then this farmer who lives on the farm came by, and he says, it's not accurate. And everybody starts saying, who are you to say it's not accurate? This is this great artist. I'm telling you, it's not accurate. So he says, how did you ever see a bird standing over grain and not eating? It doesn't exist. That's what the animal does all the time. When it has something to eat, it's constantly eating. Boom, 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 right? This bird is not eating. It's not accurate. A human being can be involved in other things. On the contrary, a human being is thinking, he's not eating all the time. He's eating, at a certain time, and that's it. And the rest of the time, he's occupied with other things. Most of the time, he's occupied with other things. So the point which we're discussing now, pointing out, that the body is built to accommodate the neshama, not the other way around. Because he has hands, that's where he's able to do things. No. The hands are there because the neshama wants to act in a certain way, has certain talents, certain capabilities. In order to accommodate these capabilities, a person has these very capable and versatile hands. And everything else is like that. So that it is true to say, on the one hand, that the body is a physical structure. On the other hand, the body actually represents the neshama. It actually represents the neshama. Except that in today's world, at this particular time, the body and the neshama, they actually join. The neshama can settle into the body. There is a constant conflict. The body tends to the physical, and the neshama wants to be spiritual. And this is why their union is not perfect. And this is why eventually they separate. Because the neshama and the body do not unite perfectly. The body still has a physical tendency. Because the body does not sense that it is made for the neshama. It senses that it's a separate entity, and the neshama gives it life. This is true in ourselves, in our own experience. This is an amazing thing. Everybody understands that the main thing in the human being is the neshama. Everybody knows that the neshama is what gives him life. And yet, how much time do we spend thinking about that neshama, and how much time do we spend thinking about our body? We're constantly preoccupied with our body. The body seems to be the central thing, most important thing to take care of. Because we do not sense the true presence of the neshama. And we are focused on the needs of the body. So even though they unite, nevertheless, there is still the sense that there is a certain separateness, separate entities, different separate interests. In the third Beis HaMikdash, there's also going to be a physical Beis HaMikdash, and there's going to be the spiritual Beis HaMikdash. But the spiritual Beis HaMikdash is going to unite with the physical Beis HaMikdash at such a level of perfection that the physical Beis HaMikdash will recognize that all it is a spiritual Beis HaMikdash. This is the meaning that the third Beis HaMikdash is built by God Himself. There will not be a disparity, a separateness between the physical and the spiritual. It will be obvious in the physical itself that this is God's handiwork, and therefore it will be completely dedicated to receiving the spiritual Beis HaMikdash. Once that there is this perfect unity between the spiritual and the physical, then that has an eternal presence, because the spiritual doesn't dissipate. The neshama lives forever, and so therefore this is how the third Beis HaMikdash, we say the third Beis HaMikdash is going to be permanent, eternal, because in the third Beis HaMikdash the physical is going to be also completely imbued with the godly presence, not just the spiritual. And this is what the Badishim says, that on Shabbos Chazon, every Yid is shown the third Beis HaMikdash. What is in this vision that he sees the third Beis HaMikdash? What's so special about it? In this vision, he sees how the very physical world itself is a godly creation, is godliness. Not that there is a physical and in that there is a neshama, like it was in the first and second Zanius. But he sees how the physical itself is godly. When he sees that, that has such a profound effect that it completely negates, nullifies his separateness. He never turns back into his own, away from this vision, his own interests, and he becomes totally attracted to this truth, the godly truth. I wanted to translate this Indian in a more practical way, how it pertains to us today. We will understand it even more. And this is really the ultimate purpose why I went into this lengthy discussion. When we are learning, here in Shiva we are learning. In everything that a human being does, there are these two elements, particularly it is in learning. When you sit and learn, there are two things that are taking place, but we are not fully aware of it. There are two things that take place. There is the work. You sit, you spend time, you read the words, you translate them, you think, you try to figure out what it says. This is all our effort to acquire this learning. This is our learning. This is the physical part. This is our contribution to the learning. But then there is another part. When we finally understand what we learned, this understanding is because, as we said before, because we have intelligence. This intelligence is a God-given quality. You cannot take an animal and train him and he should become intelligent. It doesn't work. You can't teach him anything. You can train him to act in a certain way, but that doesn't teach him. He will just act this way. I always give this very simple illustration. You have to understand what intelligence is and what kind of godly gift this is. 1 and 1, everybody heard it from you maybe 100 times, right? 1 and 1 equals to 2. Is that correct?
Wow.
1 and 1 equals to 2. Now, physically speaking, 1 and 1 equals to 1 and 1. Right? How is it changed? Because you have 1 and 1, it becomes 2. As a matter of fact, I can say the computer also says 1 and 1 equals to 2, but the computer does no difference between 1 and 2. Just spits it out. I always mention this little story that I had. I remember many years back. There was an elderly gentleman. He lived alone. Apparently, he had some education and some intelligence, but at this point, he was desolate. He was living alone. A gentleman, a very gentle person. And his friend, his only comrade was his little dog. He used to walk around with this little dog. And this dog was his company. So he trained his dog to be able to respond to simple arithmetic statements. And he demonstrated it to us. He would say 2 and 3, and the dog would bark out 5 times. Wow! Isn't that something?
It is part.
Okay. I guarantee you the dog did not know what 5 is. He didn't know that 2 and 3 is 5. He barked out 2 times and 3 times. And you saw, oh, that's 5 times. That didn't work out 5 times. Those that out 2 times and 3 times. 1 and 1. But it's really mind-boggling, right? It's really a lot of training. But the dog has to have intelligence to know the difference between 2 and 3 and 5. This is a God-given gift. And this gift, we don't begin to appreciate what that is. This is a gift that says that only is uniquely human, because a human being recognizes that there is unity in the world. It's not just one on one on one on one. There's cumulative. Like, we know that if you have 3 people, you have a mazuman. If you have 10 people, you have a minyan. Certain things you can do with a minyan. It's not 10 ones. 10 becomes one unit of 10. Who unites this 10? How do they become one? This is because this is a world that God unites. That has a godly presence. This is only available, this recognition available only to the human being. So when we sit and learn, and we are struggling with the words, and then putting them into sentences, and then translating them, and then learning, okay, and finally we know the words, oh, that's the message. And we think that when we got the message, it's the same thing, it's our struggle that got the message. Like the dog, 2 and 3. It's not that. We really understand what we've learned. It's a new message. It's a new concept. This concept we understand not because we struggled. This concept we struggled in order to get into it, and in order to break through, so to speak, the barriers. But ultimately we understand because we have a God-given faculty called seichel. So that there is a true godly element that is a participant in our learning. Now, this is extremely important to understand, because we learn. Sometimes we learn and everything makes perfect good sense. We understand it very well. And then we turn away and we go right outside into the world, and we say, was this real what I understood over there in that building? Was this real? Look at this physical world. This physical world doesn't recognize any of that. I don't see any of that. And we begin to doubt what we understood an hour ago. The reason we begin to doubt what we understood an hour ago is that we don't realize this understanding was a true human experience. We think we understood it because we made ourselves understand, because we counted 2 and 3. But there is no real unity in this. We understood it like the dog understands 2 and 3. But we have to understand that what we understood is a true insight, a human insight, a godly gift that a person, the Rebbe, gave to the human being. It may be totally above the physical. It's a concept. It's a spiritual concept, and it is a spiritual concept. But the reason that we understand it is because we really understand it. It's a reality. Not because we struggle to make ourselves understand it. We were not trained to know it, like the dog was trained. We actually have that insight coming directly from our neshama. When we get to realize that which we understand, the whole human experience, is not a man-made thing. It's not something that we are kind of forcing ourselves onto. But this is a reality, a godly reality that the Rebbe has put into the human being and into the world. Then we can pursue it and follow it and never waver away from it. Because we realize this is true. This is really a human truth, a godly truth. The fact that there is a physical world is not a contradiction to it at all. Because this concept is not based on the physical. 5 is not 2 and 3. 5 is a concept. Not like the dog counts 2 and 3. And that concept exists only to the human being. It is a special gift. And it has an element of godly truth. Once we realize that which we experience and that which we learn is a godly truth, not just the result of our labor, then we understand that this is a permanent thing. This is truth, this is reality. We don't waver away from it. It doesn't eliminate struggle, but we are going to struggle in order to maintain that truth. Because this is a real thing. And this is the message that I wanted to correlate that with the Paltiel says, that we are shown the third Beis Hamikdash. What's unique in the third Beis Hamikdash? Unique in the third Beis Hamikdash is that the very physical element itself will be manifest godly. And when we recognize that, then we know that this is eternal. And the message for this to us today is that which we understand through, that we acquire through our labor, through our struggle, there is much more than the struggle. The struggle is like building the building. But the real thing is what we realize, what this reveals to us, what we understand, which is beyond the building, the concept itself. And the concept and the emunah, the truth that we recognize, this is coming straight from the godly neshama that the Hashem gave us. This has a truth of its own. It's not the result of a certain structure, the result of a certain formula. That way, we can really, so to speak, recognize and trust and have a certain sense of reality in concept that we learn. And if this becomes real to us, then it stays with us, then we stay with it. Like I said the other day, that there are 2 types of learning. There is learning knowledge that once you know it, you can go and pass a test, a written test. You're getting a piece of paper with questions, and you pass a written test. And that establishes that you know the material. Then there's another type of learning. And the test is not a written test on a piece of paper. The other type of learning is tested in life itself. It's a question whether you can pass the test of life, not the test on paper. That's real learning. This is when you really know it. This knowledge is available to us. This is the koyach that Rebbe gave us. Only if you realize that this understanding that we know is really is real knowledge. It's not something that we've trained ourselves with, taught ourselves, made ourselves think in a certain way so that we can answer questions on the paper. But this is really something coming out from our neshama. Then this can pass the test of time. We can pass the test of life. That's real knowledge. And that way, this becomes permanent. This is what the third Beis HaMikdash really stands for. Maybe should help that each one of us should build the third Beis HaMikdash within ourselves. And this way we will merit to receive the third Beis HaMikdash from the neighbors.